everyone, and thank you for listening to BrainFruits, the podcast on women changemakers. I'm your host, Hannah Becker, and today I have the great pleasure to introduce you to Jenny Romano. Welcome, Jenny. It's just such a pleasure to have you. I just want to point out that Jenny really holds an impressive set of degrees ranging from a Master in Management from the HSC, where she studied Business Sustainability Management, to the University of Cambridge. She focused on getting into tech quite early. You were with Salesforce and Google before you co-founded now the Newsroom. And the Newsroom is a tech company that focuses on fighting misinformation and promotes plurality of thought online. Thank you for joining us today, Jenny, and welcome to the BrainFruits podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your SEMS experience, and your startup trajectory to date?
Good morning, Hannah. Thank you so much for hosting me. I was born and raised in a super tiny town in the center south of Italy, and from that tiny town, I always had this hunger to be exposed to diversity. It can be of culture, of thought, of background, you name it. But I always had this eagerness. And this led me to study first in Milan in an international course where I studied economics. And then, as you were pointing out, I headed to Paris. And then actually through my SEMS experience to Lisbon as well, where now the Newsroom is headquartered. When I moved to Google, I was working with some of the largest advertisers in Southern Europe. And I tried as much as I could to be in touch with startups as well. So I entered startups focused on the UN SDGs through the Google for Startups program, and always had this itch a little bit in my head around entrepreneurship. And so this paired with, honestly, a very big frustration towards misinformation and a passion for using tech for good, then led me to start the Newsroom.
And I think the Newsroom is so interesting. Like, there's a recent interview by the BBC Future Now that hosted a panel of 50 experts it was in early 2017, so a little bit of time ago, but they ask, what are the grand challenges we face in the 21st century? And interestingly, they named the breakdown of trusted information as one of the major challenges. Jenny, can you tell us a little bit about what is the problem with our information sources? I mean, now, especially with COVID, this is a challenge that pops up in the news.
So we will probably need a couple of days to talk about this, but I will try to give you an answer looking at a few elements. I generally tend to put them in three boxes, namely misinformation, information overload, and polarization. And let me build a little bit on this. On the one hand, the platforms where we consume news, where we engage with it, are very often designed to drive us further apart rather than closer together, since they show us content that tends to polarize us and tends to agree with what we already believe in, rather than exposing to a plurality of opinions, which is what would probably happen if instead of spending time on social media, we would go to a public square and engage with people in a normal setting, let's say. There's also an element around the incentive system. So if clicks and engagement are the one metric that measures the efficacy of news, because they are the drivers of revenue, and this comes from the move to digital, then basically we create the incentive to have outrageous communication that basically talks to our inner fears and worries. And I think COVID was a great example here, since people are drawn to it and they tend to engage more. And so there is an element of the incentive system that is currently in place that, from my point of view, needs to be tackled. Paired with this, there is actually the misconception about free information. So the internet brought about incredible progress in millions of ways. We probably would not be able to go around town without Google Maps, and we probably would not be able to keep in touch with our friends from Brazil without social media. But also it did commoditize information. So 20 years ago, if you wanted to read the news, you would go to a newsstand, buy a newspaper, pay, and get the information you wanted. And now we expect to have everything online, easily, and most importantly, freely available. So this, compared with the sheer volume of information available, decreases the perceived value of news. Now, luckily, there are promising trends. So if you take into account the overall number of people that do pay for news between 2015 and 2021, it increased by 70%, but there is still a very long way to go. Misinformation and disinformation are free. And so in terms of global reach, there is a clear discrepancy in terms of the amount of people you can reach. And so all of this basically creates the 3 points we were talking about. So the misinformation, the information overload, and the polarization are all results of these dynamics.
Disinformation and misinformation popped out. That's not the only word that popped out. There's also, I don't know if you remember, that was before COVID, but we already had a concerning development here. Like I remember in 2016, I think the Oxford Dictionary selected post-truth as the word of the year, and that tells you a lot, because post-truth really means that objective facts are less influential in shaping opinions, public opinions, than when we correlate that with emotions and personal beliefs that would be influential to public opinion. What do you think happened to this word that was selected in 2016, post-truth?
The concept of post-truth it's very much relevant today. If we post-truth is basically the result of misinformation and disinformation, paired with honestly very big worries around everything that's happening around us.
You're touching already here on exactly what I wanted to ask you next, like the risks associated with misinformation and disinformation, and especially how either does affect our strive towards an inclusive economy of well-being. What is the difference between misinformation and disinformation? How do each of these kind of hamper our strive towards inclusivity?
So the difference between misinformation and disinformation is pretty much intent. So misinformation is any sort of false information that is spread, regardless of your intention to mislead the person you're communicating with in the first place. So if you're spreading around information that is wrong, but maybe you don't know it is wrong, like we have to meet at 7 and instead I tell you that we have to meet at 8, then that is technically misinformation. Of course, I'm picking a very simple example, but that's pretty much what it is. Disinformation, on the other hand, is deliberately misleading or biased information. So I am sharing incorrect information with you, manipulated facts, manipulated data, with the intention of misleading you. So the purpose that I have when I communicate is basically the difference between misinformation and disinformation. Now, both are very dangerous, not only towards building an inclusive economy, as you were saying, but towards building an inclusive society overall, and then towards preserving the health of our democracies. With misinformation and disinformation, public debate deteriorates, and if there is no debate, there's no democracy. And so this is the fundamental problem that we have right now. And you see it everywhere. Like conversations get very heated, very fast. Polarization is rising. And it looks like there's no common ground to start having a conversation from when you meet somebody you don't necessarily agree with at 120%. And this is exactly the result of what we call the post-truth era. So we don't know what's true anymore, what we can trust. And we are overloaded with so much information every day that it gets increasingly difficult to cut through the noise and stay informed, but not get overwhelmed by it. And so this is the dynamic that I see, but it is absolutely crucial to tackle it if we want to preserve preserve and keep building the inclusive societies that we need for the world at the end of the day.
I always think about the story of Babel to some extent. When people start listening to one another, it's difficult to build a tower together, right? Where people don't even realize that we're all in this together and we're all trying to build a tower together. We're not trying to have one person building a bigger tower than the other one. It won't work in the long run. But it is quite interesting to see that this like fake new ecosystem, they really prey on some deep human instincts. I mean, misinformation, disinformation can be very much used to trigger what is in humans' primal quest for success and power, right? Like their survival instinct. How can technology be used here? Like, for example, particularly AI to promote fact-based news sources?
So technology nowadays has reached an incredible level of sophistication in a series of applications, and AI in news is one of them. I'll tell you a little bit about what we did with the technology, and then we can build on it. What we did was pretty much starting from a research phase
Yeah.
in which we spoke with a series of professionals, and some of them were specialists in ethical journalism. And so basically, the question we asked was, look, let's say I am a human being, I have an article in front of me. What should I look at when I want to assess if what I'm reading is trustworthy, is of high quality, et cetera, et cetera. And then basically from these conversations, we extracted insight and then we applied technology to it. So once we had the elements that we agreed on, and they are the source, the quality, the average quality of the source, the presence or lack thereof of information about the author, the quantity and quality of references the article uses, and last but not least, the key claims that it's making and how they cross-reference online, but also how information is positioned. And that speaks very much to the point you were raising around the way we communicate. So is the article very biased? Is the article potentially clickbait? And once we had these elements, we then applied AI and NLP to them to be able to scale them at a much higher speed than my own brain would be able
Wow.
to do it.
Wow. I've never heard about this approach. It's so cool.
It was really cool, and it was honestly very enriching for us to start from the problem statement and start speaking with people that are experts in this. And we deliberately started with very much a research approach. Okay, let's see what's out there and how we can frame our thinking around this. Once we had the elements and we decided to scale them with technology, then when you start doing things, you really realize that the potential that AI has, because it's incredibly powerful. It can do so many things in a certain amount of time that honestly you alone would not be able to do. And this is, but a very, very big caveat here, it does not mean that AI substitutes our brains when we're reading the news. No, it does not. Or when we're taking any other sort of decision, business decision, or assessing health data, whatever it is, AI does not substitute humans. This is very important.
I think that is a very important point to highlight, because there's a lot of fear around that, like, oh, is AI doing something to our brains here or not? And that is, it's often kind of almost a bit humorous, I must say, when I listen to some of the worries.
Exactly, and like I understand the worries, and they're definitely there. They need to be taken into account. But good AI is the AI that helps you take decisions. For example, when I was telling you about the key claims, what our technology does is you have an article in front of you, it extracts the key claims and it cross-references them online. So if you had to do that by yourself, you'd be reading an article, summarizing it in your head, go to a search engine, start searching for whatever it is, read other articles, and then understand if there is an agreement on the issue at stake. If you have an AI that does that for you, then you can make up your mind about whatever it is that you're reading about, but you do have the tools in front of you that basically tell you what's happening online, because otherwise, with once again the information overload, you basically need 10 hours a day to read the news, and nobody has them,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
no one has that time. No, I mean that's really also the thing. Our brains are not wired to take in so much information and make the cross references, especially in this time of our information overload. So I think that's really, really important to mention here. A lot of experts are also, I mean, not so positive outlooking, I must say. Like some say that technology by itself cannot improve human nature all that much, just because they say, well, The problem with misinformation really shows that we can kind of get out the worst side of human nature. What do you think is tech really the answer here? Yes or no?
So more tech just for the sake of it is not the answer. But good tech can be very much part of the solution for basically everything we discussed so far. So there is actually a growing trend and movement among technologists towards building humane technology, which is basically technology that is socially responsible, that knows that it can have good sides and bad sides, and most importantly, prioritizes the good side of it. It prioritizes having a good impact on society and on the world. And at the Newsroom, we want to fit, of course, in that scenario. So our technology is not built to replace human nature or to change human nature, but it is built to support us in the quest we all have to better understand the world and make up our own opinions from the reality that's around us. And the point here is exactly not building technology for the sake of it without really questioning what type of effects it will have on society. This type of approach, from my personal point of view, is very questionable. But building technology that can have good impact and that was designed from the get-go with that impact in mind, from my point of view, is good, and it can help us fight misinformation and many other of the big fights we have in the world nowadays.
To me, it sounds like you're on a really, really, really cool mission with the Newsroom. Having heard
Thank
about,
you.
yeah, no, I think it's really impressive. Like also pushing out there that AI can be used for a good cause and also outlining, what it can do and what it cannot do. It's not there to substitute a human, it's just there to help us really filter the right information that we need in order to come up with our own judgment. And that is still something that is up to us, right? Like learning to get a bit of
100%.
critical thinking and learning how to assess information in the right way is something that AI cannot do for us. Having heard about your success story with the Newsroom and your startup trajectory to date, what are some of the recommendations that you would have for professionals that would either work with data and information to prevent biases and ensure plurality of thought?
So I will not be solving this right now. You also need to hear too many voices around this. But so if you want to read about technology and explore how it can be used for good, then there are a few books that I would suggest. One of them is called Positive Computing by Calvo and Peters. Another one is actually called Moralizing Technology, which I think is very much in line with what we talked about. Also, there is a book around information, which is called Desinformation. So if I had to give one piece of advice, I would genuinely look around and understand what you're either very, very passionate about or frustrates you greatly. Because you need that motivation to keep going. You're going to have very good weeks and you're going to have very bad weeks. And when you have the bad weeks, you need to go back and ask yourself, why did I start this again? And you need to have an answer, because if you don't, then you're pretty much going to quit and go have a coffee somewhere, because it can get very difficult and very intense.
I like that you're saying not only, passionate, but also what frustrates you very much, because a lot of my podcast guests, they point out like, follow what gives you energy and do something that you're very passionate about, but it can also be something that you're very, very annoyed about and that you really think is a big problem. So I like that you point that out.
Yeah, like honestly, with the Newsroom, I've always been very much a news geek. I've always read the news like a mad woman, but misinformation frustrates me incredibly, because I cannot have conversations anymore with people. Like people start insulting each other, things get super heated, and that's insane. Like I love debating, I love speaking with people,
Yes, it's the
and
same.
it's if you look around, this doesn't happen as often as it happened in the past. And
Yeah.
so honestly, the Newsroom is very much the fruit of a passion, but also a very, very big frustration of mine and actually of my co-founders. Besides all of this, there is a very, very big priority on keeping yourself sane. So I know there is a very big hustle culture, working 20 hours a day, etc., etc. But you do need to sleep, you do need to exercise, you do need to take care of yourself. So if you want to start this, read books like Why We Sleep to understand that if you don't sleep, it's really, really bad for you. Exercise, prioritize yourself. I know whatever project you're going to start is going to be your baby, but without you, the baby is not there. So it's very much a priority for everyone. I'm not perfect in that, very far from it, but I do try my best.
That is a great recommendation. And I like this story that you're telling about. Also, when it just becomes your baby, you need to like nurture yourself in order to be able to nurture your baby. Where can listeners learn more about the newsroom?
So, well, they can head to our website, which is thenewsroom.ai. Follow us on LinkedIn, or honestly get in contact with me. I am very approachable, so do reach out to me if you have any feedback or ideas, either to me or directly to the team. The email is info@thenewsroom.ai. It is an email account that we do check, so we do get back to you. So definitely either website or LinkedIn, or get in contact directly.
Great. Thank you so much, Jenny, for being on this show. It's been such a pleasure. Please make sure to follow Jenny on LinkedIn and to check the website from the newsroom. It is really, really interesting. And I think we could have this conversation probably for much, much longer, but we're coming to an end now. So I'm just left to say a very, very, very big thank you to you for taking the time to be part of the BrainFruits podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.